Hi everyone, I'm Asim, your host and the founder of Healingclouds. Today we're in conversation with Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. Ashkan has helped two of the most successful brands in consumer web industry, AskMen and WatchMojo, which commands an audience of 150 million monthly views through its 40 million subscribers on YouTube alone. He is also the winner of the 2015 Ernst & Young Award in Media and Entrepreneurship. Ashkan is the author of 3 books and has spoken on digital media and entrepreneurship around the world. Hi Ashkan, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So Ashkan, I'd like to jump right into it. Mental health in the workplace. How can employers make it a safer workplace, improve communication, allow vulnerability, and at the same time, drive the business?
Great, complex question. It's obviously not a one-size-fits-all answer, because if you are a startup of 5 people going to 10 people, 15, 20 people, very different than if you're a small, medium-sized, privately held company of 25 to 50 people. You know, when you get to 25, communication changes. When you get to 50, it's another, cutoff point where culture communications evolves. 150, there's certain numbers, and then it's obviously very different if you're like an established business that's been around for 50, 100 years with tens of thousands of people, where some people already by nature feel like they are just a number, a cog in the machine, so to speak. So I guess the first real my question to you is, which one do you want to focus on? Because there's very different answers if we're talking about small, medium-sized, or large organizations.
Right. I think small, medium-sized, because most of our audience are obviously would resonate with that more. And I know a lot of people as well, especially in the whole student community with universities. You see a lot of startups now coming out from the university. So I think that is that's where I'd like you to start, please.
So if you're talking about that, you're probably referring to an organization that was started by an individual or a couple of individuals as founders. They don't necessarily have deep business experience. They may not even know what a human resource department person role is. They take for granted culture because it's intangible. And it's a company that doesn't necessarily even have systems and processes.
Right.
It probably has not figured out its ultimate business model, and there's a lot of different. So if we're talking about such an organization, I think the first thing is that culture is probably more important than strategy and product and even tactics, right? If you have at the core a toxic, unhealthy culture, it'll be hard to make it up with a product that's better, because one is the seed that emanates everything else. If you have a bad culture, then the good product people are going to leave, and the good business salespeople are going to leave, and so on. And to really dissect culture, it boils down to communication and conflict. Human beings, we tend to disagree. We're very emotional. We're somewhat rational for sure, but there's a lot of baggage that comes in that we carry on from previous relationships, that things that happen at the home that carry through. So for me, when I started the business, given my roots, being born in Iran, even though I grew up in Canada, it's a very here to serve mindset. There's always an element of wanting to help others, wanting to serve others. And even though I grew up in Canada, whether it was seeing or hearing things from my parents or my grandmother, or just certain nurture versus nature dynamics, every job I had, every role I had, it was this element of serving, whether it was a waiter, whether I was working in customer service. So when I started working in media, it wasn't a surprise that I landed in sales, where it was a lot of serving clients and always wanting to make sure they were happy, what they wanted, problem solving. And then eventually when I got the entrepreneurial bug, I was very keen on communicating, explaining what we were doing, what we weren't doing. And using our example, which is really just an example, but it's an interesting one because my wife and I started the company and immediately we recruited 3 other relatively young individuals. So while I'm basically the founder, effectively we are 5 co-founders, and 15 years later, we're still all working together, which is an anomaly. And you know, my wife and I, we still live together, we're married, we work together, knock on wood. I joke, you know, I have one boss at home and one boss at the office. So it's like a very clear existence for me. But the reason for that was communication, picking and choosing your battles, knowing when to lead in and be a leader and be assertive and say, sorry, this is the way we're going to do it. You know, not take it or leave it, but effectively, you know, this is the way it has to be for these reasons. And not because of your rank or because of your title, just because you articulate that this is the idea, the strategy, the tactics, and if there's not a better idea. But also knowing when to defer, when to delegate, when to trust others. Even sometimes saying, you know what, this may be a mistake, but let's see what happens. And if it's not fatal, it'll help us to learn better. So I was always very much, you know, as much as I have my weaknesses and shortcomings, one thing that I had that was very good was a desire to communicate, a desire to resolve conflict. So my advice to people when you are the founder, when you're that initial core group that starts an organization, because it does start with you. You know, your product may come up from an individual that's not a founder. Your sales will probably come from an outsider. But ultimately, the vision, the mission, your statement of purpose, which are all different things, but ultimately, mainly the morals, the principles, how you decide what to do to resolve conflict. There's always the temptation, right, of good versus evil, giving into the so-called dark side, greed, you know, all those, you know, so-called sins. So it boils down to you. So you have to be very open to communicate in conflict. Now, you might say, well, look, a lot of founders tend to be introverts and they're not necessarily, you know, open to that. They run away from that, which then means as much as you hear startups, advisors and entrepreneurs and investors say you have to complete your skill set, that is not limited to, oh, I'm a product guy, so let me go get a marketing guy, or I'm a sales guy, let me go get an engineer. You do need somebody that likes to hear people's problem and discuss it and come up with solutions in a non-political, you know, that is as critical as a strong technical guy, you know. So if I was, and I've started to invest and advise startups, I've advised startups and entrepreneurs for pretty much ever, but like even when I start to invest, I kind of try to look for that person to say, well, who's the person who is effectively playing the hat of a chief people officer, chief, you know, like a human resource person who ultimately isn't necessarily here to know like, okay, what form to fill out for the government to get this benefit or that, you know, health plan, but just more about conflict resolution. Because if you have that from the get-go, when you add new employees and they come in, they see that, oh, communication is key, conflict resolution is key. They don't let things drag out where then somebody leaves and it's toxic. Now, there's a trade-off. The faster you want to grow, the bigger you want to grow, it's harder to maintain that. Right. So I would say that the very first thing is looking inside as a founder, as a group of founders, and recognizing that you need that. And if you think you don't need it, it's just going to come back to bite you the same way you might not think you need an accountant. And then so understand that is important. Like that is as important, you know, as like if you know, you may not see your heart, but if you don't have your heart, guess what? You're not going to live, you know? So it's just as important. And then so that was the first step to then answer your actual question. It's just pattern, like the difference between intention and how people perceive your intention are your words and actions. So if you say we care about people, but you actually don't, like I care about people deeply. I like people to feel good. I like when people are over, I want to feed them, give them food and drink and make sure that, you know, are you cold? You see that in me. It's like I'm neurotic about making sure people are comfortable and all. But that also means sometimes I will say things that people don't like to hear. And the reason for that, it's not because I want to be abrasive. It's not because I want to be, you know, I may say privately, I may say, it's because I could see that this is going to percolate into a bigger problem. So I'll just come and be like, hey, look, I wasn't expecting this. This is not acceptable. And admittedly, you may lose some people, but, and I hate to say this, it is better to lose those people early on, because then that leads to a toxic culture.
Correct. I mean, understanding the fine line as well, because it's interesting. I mean, you put your people before anything else, and it's really important to to take care of your people, but also putting that fine line where if you have to let go of somebody or if you have to put your foot down, you should be able to do that as well. Because sometimes you perhaps maybe are too nice, and then you're taken advantage of. So I think having that fine line is also important.
Absolutely. People who say if I had to do things again all over, I wouldn't do it anything differently, they're either lying or they're naive, right? I mean, look, I agree that I am here today, and I'm very happy, I'm blessed. But I'm here today because of every decision, every action, every word I've said. It's the culmination of those things. So if I had to choose one thing to do differently, maybe I'd be in a worse spot. Maybe I wouldn't have my wife, my 2 daughters. So I wouldn't change anything in that sense, sure. But obviously I would learn from, and if I was in that same situation going forward, I would do things differently. There's so many things I do differently in the context of strategy, life, picking out a wardrobe, what food I ordered, the apples I picked. But just in the context of this conversation, absolutely. One of the biggest mistakes, you'll hear it after this break. No, I'm kidding. One of the biggest mistakes I've made in my life professionally was like this kind of like desire, earnest in good intentions to keep everybody and never let people go. We've let a few people go, but the same way that the 5 co-founders are still there, we've probably hired 75 people. We've had 10 people leave, let's say 15 people leave, 5, we let go, 10 people quit. Like the numbers are staggeringly positive, like very little turnover, overall high retention. And not to be mean to anybody, maybe the fit wasn't there, but more keeping the right people, not that the right people versus like good or bad, but just the right fit.
Sure.
So like when I look at my record as a leader, I'm very proud of who we've kept and how we've kept them. But a mistake I did was sometimes if I hired somebody, these are random names. We hire, Harry to work in a department. And that department is to sell leather shoes. Nobody wants our leather shoes, but then I go, okay, you know what? Why don't you instead we'll keep you to sell leather belts because it's leather as well. And he goes, oh, okay. We're doing him a favor. He thinks he's doing us a favor. 3 months later, nobody wants our leather belts either, and he hates belts. He was really passionate about shoes, let's say. Would have been better for me to make him sell sports shoes instead of leather belts. You know what I mean?
Correct.
You think you're doing everybody a favor. It's like a relationship where the 2 people don't want to be together. But then eventually he quits. So Harry quits, and then 6 months later, somebody goes, oh, well, how do you feel about the fact that Harry quit? And the truth is, harsh as it is, I'm like, well, Harry quit not because we suck as an organization, but because he wasn't a fit.
Yeah.
We should have let him go. But by keeping him on, you drag on a miserable situation, like to be like extreme. You actually hurt culture. You're sending a weird communication. You now all of a sudden have all this inventory of leather shoes and leather belts and leather hats that you don't need. And it actually sends a weird message that both you kept somebody that you should not have as much as you push for a meritocracy, but that somebody quit. So you might be doing something wrong. So now, at the end of last year, I was like it was the end of the decade, and I really like retrospected a lot, And I was kind of myself sometimes, as a very driven, competitive person, you get, for lack of better words, depressed. Maybe not clinically depressed. I'm not a psychologist, but definitely that's depression. I'm down. I'm upset. Despite all the success you have, despite all the wins and the goals you score, like I'm an amateur soccer player. I'm a striker. I want to score everything and I want to win every game. It doesn't happen. Even if you score a hat trick and you win 3 games out of 4,
correct.
With friends, you think of that last goal you didn't score in the one game you lost, and it's crazy to think like that, right? But so last year I would kind of let people go if there wasn't a fit. And I was like, look, I wouldn't give them the cliche of I'm doing you a favor. And it's hard to let people go, but you just realize that it's fundamentally better to just recognize when it's not a fit and not delay the inevitable. So one of the biggest mistakes I've learned is not to delay the inevitable. If something is not working in a relationship, if something is not working with people, just part ways. It's near-term pain, but long-term, you're saving everybody a lot of grief.
Yeah, I think I resonate with you on that as well, because maybe you're not doing everybody a favor, but you might be doing a lot of people a favor. Of course, you are doing a favor to your company, but also to them. Maybe they, the sooner they come out from your company, the sooner they get, on their right path and their journey.
And they need to go through that, right? I think, look, I hate to say it, this is overall, I'm 42, so I like to think I'm neither young or old. It's all relative. But it's a generation that ultimately has gone through certain things. I mean, obviously now with COVID, but before that, you could argue the financial crisis, the 9/11, and in other parts of the world, there's war been going on all their life. If you are like in Afghanistan, in Iraq, I mean, like you look at that and there's a lot of madness going on around the world, but it hasn't really been challenged and tested and, put through like learning the ropes the way previous generations did. It is a generation that largely, because maybe they grew up around higher divorce rates and other, things that affected them, a high in the US, especially a lot of student debt, education that doesn't really help them. It's been a lot of injustice to this, sub 48 cohort, the millennials that everybody poops on. But I mean, a lot of it is unfair to them. They were told in the US, go get an education, go in debt, and then you come out, there are no jobs. And the only jobs seem to be like minimum wage practically, so it's kind of an unfair reality many find themselves in. And I think we have to be realistic of that. But at the flip side, and I always see both sides, the flip side is like we've coddled them. They haven't really gotten the tough love. And that's another mistake I did, where I wouldn't give people like as much of like true harsh feedback if they weren't good at something, because they needed better training. And we give all the training in the world, but I'm just saying it's been like very protected and coddled. And like in North America, they say, everybody touches the ball, everybody gets a medal. And it's not actually, it's not actually helpful. You actually have to be a little bit tough. It's like sports, like not everybody wins. But when you get hit and when you are hurt, like you come out stronger and better. So I think ultimately they need to go through that. I've come out so much stronger, as a more affordable fighter because of the setbacks I've had. So in a way, by kind of punting and not giving somebody the reality that, look, maybe this isn't a fit for you. Maybe you shouldn't work in this industry. Maybe you should do something else. Yeah, I think ultimately you are helping them, but not necessarily the day they get the news, just over time,
I read an interesting article you wrote on LinkedIn, and this is, it really caught my attention. You said something down the lines of no vaccine, no normal. So what is this normal, and how much of it do we want to go back to, especially in the terms of work culture?
Yeah. So look, let me preface, I'm not a doctor. I did speak to a few medical professionals before writing that, but what was happening, just for context, was I was having a lot of live entertainment and sports executives actually ask me when we were just catching up, saying, okay, you're good at PR and communication, and you are like, you've always seen different perspectives. How can we actually reasonably expect to come back when other people who are not multi-millionaire athletes and billionaire owners are being asked to not come back? Like, how do you get a comedy festival going? How do you get a sports tournament going? How do you get live shows and concerts going? Because we understand to say, oh, poor us and poor entertainers, the optics are not bad. That's frankly the context, because that article got read a lot, and people need to know the context. So what I kind of said is I told them, I broke it down for them. I said, look, let me take you through all the steps. Like, first, you have to identify people returning to work. You have to ask, do they have kids or not? Mm-hmm. If they have kids, what's the daycare, school, camp situation? If there are no kids, and kids, the mortality rate thankfully has been low, but they could transmit it, I presume. It's an unknown. Maybe they don't, maybe they do. So that's a big dynamic. But then you got to go through, okay, retail. Some retail is just never going to come back, because I don't actually need to go in a store and buy toothpaste and buy shampoo. I mean, I don't know if I need shampoo, but the point is,
But you're right, the dynamics have changed. Yeah.
The dynamics have changed. I may just order it, it's either delivered, or even if I want to go for a drive, I just go through a pickup and they put it in my car. I get to go in a little spot, I check everything's there, and I go and I don't touch anybody. So even retail changes. So these all have to go through, like, innovation that would have happened in a decade is going to happen in a year. But then, like, I go, like, if you're going to be even a conference, you need travels to be functional, and you need airport to be functional. And I said, now you guys are in like the concert and sports. You're not going to have these people get on a plane, go across town, and people come to, if they want to see, Taylor Swift in concert, and they come from all over Europe to London, and then they go back and take COVID with them. So I was like, unless testing is available, well, the same way you go through a metal detector, you somehow get tested on the spot. So 50,000 people can go in and out to make sure they don't have it. And that is not possible. Like we're not there, you know? So I go, unless you have testing, then you need a vaccine. But I go, even if you have a vaccine, well, you're not going to produce a vaccine for 7 billion people. You know what I mean? You're probably going to have a vaccine for frontline first responders, realistically, you know, like the people who are actually most at risk, maybe some old people. And I hate to say it, society's going to have that conversation. In America, they were already saying, let the old people die so that the young people have a good economy, as harsh as it is. So are they going to give vaccines to older people? Like, you know, there's this whole ethical thing. You know, we're living in this very unique time that I'll let others have that conversation. So my point was, we needed to, and I wrote this very early, which I think shocked a few people, but I basically said, everybody has to accept the new normal right away. You know, the 5 stages of grief, you know, anger, negotiation, bargaining, acceptance, you know, whatever they are. I was like, go through them however you want, but nothing's going to be normal. You know, if you're in the spa business, hair salon, I got news for you. You don't want people touching your face. You're not going to have 10 people side by side. Everything changes, but maybe it changes and people come to your home. I don't know what it looks like. You know, you're going to have companies that maybe had an ethical, optical problem with having automation instead of cashiers, human beings. And they're like, oh, you know, like society has this conversation about, well, what's a, you know, universal basic income? What's minimum wage? And, you know, companies were very quick. I'm not putting words in McDonald's mouth, but more or less McDonald's was like, well, if you force us to give a $15 minimum wage in the US, we're going to automate everything. And then it's like, oh, you guys are a big, bad, evil corporation. Yeah. Let's be honest. Corporations are already scheming and plotting how they could eliminate a lot of labor costs from their operation. Labor cost is 2/3 of, you know, their cost structure almost. So they could be like, hey, you know what? We're care about our clients' well-being, so no more human cashiers. It's now all robots, and they're kind of laughing in the back end, right? So I think there's going to be this radical shift in the 2020s towards automation, AI. You know, retail is going to change. And so I think you as an individual have to ask yourself, if I used to work in a field and through this pecking order, I'm the last in line. And I do think concerts and sports events are the last in line. And before that, you may have, you know, cruises could even be further out, but before, you know, even conferences, business conference. So you're not going to get 50,000 people, like Web Summit. You're not going to get 70,000 people descending upon Lisbon from all over the world. Like realistically, Lisbon's like, yeah, no, thanks. You know, the economic boom is good when people arrive, but we don't want to be left with a resurgence of coronavirus, you know? So I think my point was, depending on that, ask yourself, do you need to reinvent yourself? Sure, the government's going to give people some form of income so that the economy doesn't totally crater, but you should be asking yourself, do I need to reinvent myself? Now, entrepreneurship is a path. Not everybody is an entrepreneur, but everybody had to be entrepreneurial even before Corona times because, you know, lifetime employment at one company was already a thing of the past. And so my point is, entrepreneurship is absolutely a solution here. Not for everybody, but for some. So if you worked in an industry, what skills did you learn? Did you learn about something? Were you always... Because the challenge of entrepreneurship is... the challenge of entrepreneurship, realistically, is the opportunity cost. You know, it's like if you're working somewhere, you have a mortgage to pay, you don't want to take the leap because, well, what if you take the leap and it doesn't work out? But if you've lost your job and there's nothing waiting for you, instead of just waiting for somebody to give you a job, which may not even exist, you might want to be like, is there something that I can do? Because you know, when I was 20, if you would have told me I'd be an entrepreneur, it was like, maybe, I'm not sure, right? Anybody. So I'm just saying that, like, there is this great opportunity, but you also have to be tasteful in how you say this because people, I think, are still quite a bit in shock.
And how do you think this new normal will affect our mental health? I mean, obviously, it has impacted mental health during this pandemic or during the crisis that we are in. But I mean, moving forward, I mean, how do you think it affects our mental health? And if there's a negative effect, how would you say we could then manage our mental health in a better way?
Well, look, absolutely. There's going to be, I think, a bigger toll on people's mental health than health-wise. You know, realistically, if you average out, far more people are going to be carrying this with them.
then the health, unless you die, or if you got it, the likelihood you recover is pretty high, right? So the far bigger spillover is health. Is mental, sorry, is mental. Mental is going to be far bigger. Depending on your age and depending on how your perspective is, maybe you lost, like I always go, for a decade, I've always gone to bed with the fear that YouTube makes a spill, somebody spills coffee and all the channels that start with W disappear and then my business goes away. Like that's just a risk where, but it's like other, less crazy ways, but like that's a risk I've slept with and woken up with. So for me, it's kind of like I've braced myself for that possibility. But if you're Disney, well, you never thought that theme parks, cruises, theatrical, everything shuts down. So you're shell-shocked and you're still trying to make sense of it. So far and away, the mental impact of that shock, that oh my God, is going to be greater, especially if you're still not and it's going to affect both, like people who are really wealthy, had a great lifestyle, and all of a sudden they have to adjust, but also people who are just starting their career thinking that they were going to enter the workforce and had a job, but all of a sudden, everything is pushed back. So yes, I think though that, and this may sound cliche, it does boil down to perspective. Western countries have basically been very fortunate to, by and large, not live under war, famines, bad living conditions. That, let's be honest, is pretty much par for the course if you are in South America, Central America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, many parts still of Europe. So I'm not saying it's like a common denominator. But I'm just saying, maybe it starts off with, when we talk about empathy is a two-way street, right? Like we talk about mental health. Before mental health became a cause célèbre of, wealthy celebrities and corporations, I was writing about it. And I was talking about especially why entrepreneurs in particular were suffered from bouts of depression. But I also go, wait a second, it's a two-way street. If you as my colleague want me to empathize with you because you have certain mental challenges, well, you also have to respect your peers. You can't act unprofessionally to others, cite mental health, and then expect us to kind of like empathize with you, right? So I always kind of say things that people don't want to say, but as, aside from my wife, I don't have an outside boss to say, I can't believe you said that, but that's true. Like it's a two-way street, right? And that was my earlier point I was alluding to. We've given carte blanche to a lot of younger millennials that we've just said, okay, you can do what you want, we understand it. But it's like in my generation, if I acted out of line, I had a boss, a parent, somebody tell me off, and I didn't do that again. So absolutely, the mental health is going to be deep, but you know what? That's life. That's how 3-4 billion people out of 7 have lived. So now one has to adjust and find a way to get out of it. What does that mean? That means, not blaming government, the great and horrible thing about the pandemic is, as you said before we started to record, it affects everybody. It's the first time that black or white, woman, men, gay, straight, tall, bald, hair, whatever you are, doesn't matter. It doesn't actually discriminate. Now, the problem is when you have celebrities like Ellen say, I feel like quarantine feels like living in a jail. Well, yeah, that's tone deaf. But setting that aside, it doesn't really discriminate. It does affect everybody. So I feel like that is what life is all about. All right, the setbacks make you stronger mentally, physically, emotionally to get through adversity. Life is about persistence. Life is about resiliency. Those who are resilient and overcome challenges become stronger and succeed. So the fact that it's a pandemic, okay, it sucks. But you know what also sucks? If you're a Syrian boy who's been living under war for all your life, and you know what? Nobody cared about that guy. Nobody cared about the girl in Africa who is like, Boko Haram showed up to my village. You know what I mean? There's a great hashtag, but that was all and I myself am like that. And I've also become very emboldened, when this first happened. I wanted to help everybody, individuals and companies, but I also realized there are some companies I can't help. Live Nation is like a major concert promoter, for example. There's nothing WatchMojo can do to help them, as despite our intentions. There's no concerts. It's like, that's it. Like, what am I going to do, right? The same thing with people. You try to help people, you try to help individuals understand that. But if somebody is ultimately, and again, this is not politically correct to say, but I think people have to hear it. you want to help once or twice. But at the third and fourth time, when you're like, look, there's no need to get excessively, needlessly anxious, because it doesn't really affect you if you physically distance, wash your hands, wear a mask. If you don't put yourself out there, there's also still companies hiring. Now, you might have thought you had a certain career path and that changes, but I thought I would be a striker, for a given country, and that doesn't happen. You have to be. So I just feel like the mental health is there, but the mental health has always been an obstacle for generations through World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, what's going on in many countries. And then finally, economically, look, again, we live in a society in North America, where I'm based, where it's very highly conspicuous consumption. It's always been unlimited. We have very few needs in life, but unlimited wants. And I think some people are going to have a harsh reality that if you're going out there and buying $600 pair of sneakers, you may not have a job in a few. You don't have a job now, and you may not have a job for the next 6 months. That's something that, if not the pandemic, something eventually was going to catch up with us. But through this, there will be a lot of progress, innovation, and opportunity. And the winners will basically, adapt and figure that out. And that's life. And there are going to be people who don't adapt. And I think we as humans have a kind of not a responsibility more than an obligation to try to help. But I also think that, like, in life, some people don't want help. And some people, it's like war. I will fight for every soldier on my team. But if a soldier just doesn't want to fight and they're shooting at the sky and shooting at one another, well, then what are you going to do with that?
What are you going to do? Yeah.
So you have to be just a bit more realistic. You don't want to be, too me. And I've never been like that. But you just want to be realistic is what my main takeaway is.
I mean, you rightly said, if it wasn't the pandemic, it would be something else. I mean, when we talk about challenges, I think we always have challenges. It's just that the nature of challenges change, right? So of course you always have mental health, and how do you now, first look out for yourself, and then actually, put things into perspective. Like you spoke about somebody trying to, who's used to buying a $600 sneaker. Well, I mean, good morning. There are people who don't have food to eat. So, perhaps maybe the positive from this, maybe a lot of people will hopefully take out, is that, how, perhaps maybe like a reality check more than anything else. I think that is what's important.
We are so saying the right things about first responders and frontline people and, nurses and cops and why does the cashier make this? And look, society's going to have like its judgment day and the day of reckoning, where they're going to have to answer these questions and say, look, was it all, lip service? Should the cashier be making $10 versus $15 or $12 versus $18? Should the nurse and the teacher, should we be cutting back? I actually, as much as I'm always the eternal optimist, I actually don't think that we're going to change that much. I think when push comes to shove, and when we eventually get out of this, whenever that is, it'll be forgotten. We'll still, put more money in, right now. I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about the military, because what they're trying to do is I think be positive. But like you see in America, they're flying these jets over New York and to kind of as an homage to the nurses. Yes. Whatever you spent on that plane and that fuel, give them protection equipment. Take that money, go get them 6 more ventilators. So it'll be the same thing. It'll be like, okay, well, we thank the nurses and we're going to build this statue for them in this park, and this represents the great service they did. But they're like, well, wait, we wanted an extra week of vacation and 10% of an increase in salary. And I think, unfortunately, politicians have been politicians since day one. And greed is, what we said, fear is temporary, greed is permanent. So I hope this leads to, permanent change and improvement. But I think the great thing about, people always talk about journalism is under fire, but I hope people, not just journalists, but people like using social media, hold people accountable over time and say, look, are you going to make the kind of change in society where, a teacher gets paid a bit more and the health is going to get a bit more resources and all this other stuff that we've kind of chipped away. And now we're wondering, well, why is it that there's not enough hospital beds? And if you look at just demographically with so many folks getting older and older, when you think of pension pressures and health infrastructure, COVID was a dry run for what is going to be our reality, not just with health demographics, but also with climate change. Whether you think it's man-made or not, forget the cause.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
But there's going to be fires and hurricanes, and there's going to be like insane occurrences happening that are going to affect multiple parts of the world at once. Before this happened, it seems like a decade ago, Australia was on fire.
Yeah.
Every year for the last 3 years, I think California is an inferno. So, do we want to maybe use this as like a warning that, hey, maybe we need to set things up and plan better? We shall see. The jury's out.
A follow-up question, again with the mental health, but bringing it back to, entrepreneurs. So, how can entrepreneurs take care of their mental health? And something interesting, again, crushing it and dealing with insecurities, because I know you have spoken about that subject as well. You call it a false reality. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think entrepreneurs are always not driven actually by like fame and like money. I think there are some insecurities, like it's for some the bad insecurity, like I want to have more money than my neighbor and a better car. I mean, that's bad insecurities, but some people are driven by that, and it is what it is. Good insecurities are more like, oh, I really want to have a legacy and I want to help people. And we set the bar so high because success is relative, subjective, and fluid. We set the bar so high that then we're always kind of like unhappy with, oh, we're not doing enough, right? So I think because success is relative and subjective, meaning we define what it is and it changes over time, it's also fluid. Amongst entrepreneurships 30, 40 years ago, it was like for misfits and crazies and, one or two people out of a million. I wouldn't even think Richard Branson is an entrepreneur today. He's still, he may be, because he's not really risking his own capital, and that ultimately is what defines an entrepreneur. But originally, like the Richard Bransons, like the big entrepreneurs that took the risks, they were anomalies or exceptions. Today, every kid wants to be an entrepreneur because they see Mark Zuckerberg and all that. But because it's fueled so much by venture capital, where you have to project a certain aura of success and crushing it, in my third book, The 10-Year Overnight Success, I didn't talk as much about my own struggles with, am I doing enough? What's my legacy? Am I adding value and all that? Am I going to, leave the world a better place than when I came in? But I alluded to that because there had been some suicides, especially in the LA startup community, and people were shocked. And why? Because the individual was projecting an aura of success and all that. And last year in Montreal, this acquaintance I had, he took his own life as well, another entrepreneur, and people were just shocked. And I said, it's because with venture capital, it's distorted even what success is, meaning it's a going concern in accounting term. It's a business that functions, it pays its bills, it's solvent, it contributes some value to stakeholders, whether it's clients or communities or employees and all. But with venture capital propping up so many companies that really only exist because of this thin air, and setting aside pandemic, but it's weird that like a year ago, Uber, Airbnb, and WeWork were like billion unicorns, and now they're all, God knows what's going to happen to them. But so the problem is then to go and get venture capital, you had to project this sense of we're crushing it, we're crushing it, when in reality, most companies were not crushing it. They were really good at just raising money.
Yeah.
So to more pure entrepreneurs, there's entrepreneurs, there's venturepreneurs who raise venture, there's entrepreneurs who keep talking about being entrepreneurs but never actually take the risk. So to a more pure entrepreneur that basically just risks his own capital, starts a business, has to be profitable, it was always very hard because you just saw these companies raise so much money, and you had to stay focused and composed, and you had to have perspective. I think perspective is really important to kind of say, let me block out the noise. Let me just see what is it that's important. And then the other one I feel is balance. Balance is not easy. Balance is not even a destination. There's no end point where you're at 50-50. It's never 50-50. It's actually a journey. It's actually a process. It's like a state of mind. You're yearning for balance, and balance is not just work and play, like work life. it's work, life, play, like it's a lot of dynamics, because also there's a difference between, why do some people go and sail, or some people go and play soccer, or some people do cooking, it's just like, it's not just, so I'm just saying, like, you're constantly juggling. And why do you work? It's because you maybe want a nice house and you want to take a trip, and but you can't just travel year long because you need to work. And, so I'm just saying, once you realize that there's this constant juggling act, the same way that you have like your mind, your body, your soul, like it's always been, like mankind's been solving the same thing. You read Plato, you read Freud, you read my article, it's the same things we're trying to solve for. And it's this constant yearning of trying to do better, do more, not give in to the dark side, not give in to evil. Every day you're given the opportunity to cheat and to steal, and you have to kind of resist that and say, no, I might get to some material thing faster, but then you have to say, well, I don't care about that material thing because that's not what I got into business for. So once you kind of figure out that alchemy of variables in your life, then you have to kind of start to be like, hey, let me drown out the noise. I know why I got into business, why I went into an entrepreneurship. And you kind of like literally, and I think what COVID does is it eliminates some of that noise, that kind of distortion, and just like the background, it's a simpler time, right? Like, and I've actually been really happy overall. There's a lot of stress and anxiety, but I've been really happy. I'm at home. I see my kids a bit more. I like to cook, so I get a bit more time to cook. It presents a lot of challenges, and I think people have to find the good in things. You really, really have to be able to see the good in things. And I think hopefully that's the main takeaway for many people.